Shadow of the Erdtree came out about a week and a half ago. And since then, there have been multiple different controversial things that have happened, which is to be expected. FromSoft is basically top dog on the hill in the gaming industry right now. And when they come out with something, a lot of people are going to play it. And like anything internet related, everybody has an opinion. And so I wanted to talk about those opinions in this video. I want to talk about different points of view, different people, different arguments, what I think is valid, what I don't think is valid, and my overall perspective after having been playing Shadow of the Erdtree for a week and a half myself. So that's what this video is. Let's just dive into it. So Shadow of the Erdtree came out June 21st, and immediately after the first weekend, Steam reviews got bombarded by players talking about how the game is too difficult. And this is no surprise. FromSoft games are notoriously difficult. Miyazaki himself came out and talked about how Shadow of the Erdtree was going to be one of the more difficult DLCs he's ever made. And so, yeah, people complaining about this is par for the course. The interesting that happened, though, was what ensued. There was multiple different articles that came out talking about how players were figuring out that they should be using things like rune arcs, and they weren't using them before, it's a powerful buff that you can utilize. Even FromSoft themselves said, hey, you guys may want to level up your Erdtree blessings. And so a lot of the complaints right away, in my opinion, was just people QQing about how hard the game was without actually figuring out how to play the game. From my perspective, there are multiple different things that make this DLC a lot easier to do. Some of it is Erdtree blessings. Going around and collecting these helps quite a bit. It helps substantially. Using rune arcs also helps. Using summons, calling in other players for boss fights, doing all these sorts of things, running a better build. All of these things are available in the game for you to utilize. And it's kind of funny to me when people complain about difficulty and then the vast majority of players aren't using the tools that are allocated to them. And it was just one of those like, okay, you're just complaining to complain. I'm not saying that Shadow of the Erdtree isn't difficult. It is difficult, and I like it. I like that it's difficult. I like that it's challenging. My biggest concern as a player that recently beat Elden Ring back in January for the first time, I was worried that Shadow of the Erdtree was going to be kind of like a cookie cutter clone. You know, like instead of going from Madden 2023 to Madden 2024, it's just a repeat of the biggest hits, which a lot of games do sometimes. And so I was worried that maybe the boss cadence would be the same, maybe the difficulty would be the same. And towards the end of my Elden Ring run, the bosses got a lot easier because as I leveled up, I became really powerful and I got better at the game. And I was worried that Shadow of the Erdtree wouldn't be difficult for me because I had already gotten to a point to where Elden Ring was no longer difficult for me. And that was immediately disproven right away. It was immediately disproven. I died on the first ad that I faced, and it was a sobering, somber point of, hey, this game is going to be hard, which is what I wanted. I have it fresh in my mind from having recently beaten it that's exactly what it felt like for me when I jumped into the plains in Elden Ring. When I first went into Limgrave and I encountered the Tree Sentinel, when I encountered my first NPCs and I was trying to figure out the controls, everything felt daunting. And Shadow of the Erdtree is no different. When I hopped in and I faced off against the Black Gold Knight, it felt daunting. It felt very challenging, and it was in a good way. Like that's what I was hoping, that I was going to get some of those Elden Ring vibes immediately. And I know it's kind of funny to say Elden Ring vibes, but sometimes games don't get DLCs right, is my point. And so I think they've hit it out of the park. I think it is properly difficult. I think there are a lot of tools. Every time I've used Mimic Tier in this game, it's felt like a cheat code. Not that it is cheating, it just makes it substantially easier. You can call it, like I said, there's so many different resources available for you to complete this game that the initial complaints after the first weekend, you can't help but chalk a lot of that up to just crying about the game. Now, this is also brought forward other video game developers. Helldivers came out in defense of Shadow of the Erdtree, and they said, quote, "A game for everyone is a game for no one." I'm going to provide an analogy here for you guys. I feel like the overall gaming community, when you look at games, I think a fair, apt comparison is you can compare games to like restaurants. You have your generic, everyday, like Applebee's, Ruby Tuesdays, like your Buffalo Wild Wings, where it's just, You got a little bit of everything. You got fast food, you got fried food. For the price point in the food, it's solid, right? And then you have your Peter Luger's Steakhouse, and you have your high-end sushi restaurants, and you have your hibachi grills, and you have all these other more specialized things. There's a time and place for all of these, right? You don't want to go to the same restaurant all the time when you go out to eat, but you have your favorites. I feel like the average gamer is like an Applebee's enjoyer. They like going to Applebee's for the price point. They have a wide variety of foods at a reasonable price. The food tastes fine. And so it's okay going back there because you feel like you're going to get you're going to have a fine time, right? It's not going to blow your socks off about how good the food is or anything like that. But that's the kind of experience. What I feel like gamers do in this situation is they want every video game to be like Applebee's. I think that's the wrong approach. I think there's a time and place for easier games. I think there's a time and place for just brainless button mashing. I think there's a time and place for farming and grinding. I think there's a time and place for games that are difficult. And so when I look at a game like Elden Ring, I see like one of the best steakhouses available. Like maybe you're not a big fan of steak. Maybe you don't like steak. But this is, if you're going to like steak, this will be one of the best versions of it. And what I got out of it is this game is the world experience, the immersion is good, the bosses are done really well, and the difficulty with the boss combat mechanics just kind of intertwined to make just a masterpiece of a game. Does this mean that everybody's going to like it? No, absolutely not. And I think that's part of the issue with the gaming industry as a whole, is too often you have games that try to cater to everybody. Too often you have games that literally are just going out there to pinch every single dollar they can. Justifiably so. It's a business. You're trying to make as much money as possible, but you lose the soul of the game. You lose the soul of the game. You end up not really cultivating a following. And then you have all these AAA gaming studios having to, fire a bunch of developers because you're not coming out with new, exciting, original content, and your followings just aren't as big as they used to be, and you're not making the money that you need to in order to support those devs. And so it's really unfortunate to see, but I think that we're just going through a little bit of a turmoil where it feels like AAA gaming studios have kind of lost their way for what games are. And I think in order to refine the way, they need to identify what they think their player base is and make a game for that player base instead of trying to cultivate to everybody. An example that crossed my mind recently on this is New World. New World started off before the game released as like a survival style MMO where it was very cutthroat. You would go out in the world. If you got killed out there, you could lose all your loot. You could lose your gear. Like it was very, very hardcore. And they listened to the community. The community said that it was too hardcore. They're like, hey, we'll play your game if you give us like a toggle system and you allow PvP to be toggle off. If you do this, we'll play your game. And Amazon Gaming Studios saw this and they go, hey, well, we like money.
Hello, I like money.
We're big fans of money. We'll absolutely provide a toggle system. And that, with a bunch of other design flaws, started kind of killed the game initially. There's a bunch of other issues with the game, of course. I'm not going to go into every single one, but they've recently, before this new DLC is coming out this fall, they're now changing from being an MMORPG to more of an ARPG because they want to cater to more of a solo player experience. And so, New World, a game that has been out for 3 years now, has gone through 3 dramatic design shifts. Now, there are all sorts of reasons for why it is failing, and it's not doing well, and it's not cultivating a player base. There's more than one reason. It's never any one thing. But my point is would the game really be any worse off right now if it's stuck to its survival roots? Would the game be any worse off right now if it's stuck to its more MMORPG roots? No, it wouldn't. And the problem is they're going after what they think is going to generate them the most money instead of making the best game possible. And I think that's an issue. I think that's the issue. And so I want to end my overall opinion with Shadow of the Erdtree with this. You may not like it, and that's okay. But I think video games having a direction on who they want their player base to be, how they want things to be designed, who they're going to make this game for, I think that's an honorable route for video games to go. And it would be nice to see more games do this. It would be nice to see more games identify a player base and then develop around it. Not every game has to function in the same way that Elden Ring is, but it is respectable that Elden Ring knows what won it Game of the Year, and they're sticking to it because they have a player base that knows what they're going to get when they play this game. They're excited about it, and it's the best form of this type of game with this type of player base that you're going to probably find in the industry. And so all that's really great. Now, I was going to end this video and I was going to put a bow in it, but more viral nonsense popped up on my Twitter feed about Elden Ring as I was recording this video, and I thought it'd be good to include this as well because I think it's pertinent. Where did this drama come from? Well, a video from Cheryl Anazard came out yesterday, and one specific clip of this 17-minute video went viral where they took stuff out of context. And yeah, we're just going to dive into what it was. But regardless, I'm going to provide a link in the description of the video. You guys should go check it out. You guys should go watch it entirely. I thought she did a very good job. A lot of her points echo a lot of the same sentiments I made in this video. And so of course I'm going to agree with her. Of course, like we think the same. And so yeah, of course I'm going to think that her video is good. But regardless, what went viral was she got into a discussion about accessibility for players with disabilities. Now, a large portion of the player base, hardcore FromSoft players, are going to look at this and they're immediately going to jump to easy button. Like their brain just goes caveman mode and they're like, oh, you want the game to be easier. She spent 16 minutes talking or 15 minutes talking about how she doesn't want the game to be easier. But regardless, like she said this and, you know, people think she's pulling a fast one, I guess. I don't understand how the caveman brain works sometimes, even though I'm a caveman myself. But yeah, she got a discussion and she was talking about different forms of disabilities. There's different types of disabilities that exist out there. And she brought up an example of a situational disability.
So this is the second half of this video where I'm going to talk specifically about accessibility, and even just a lot of people really not understanding the conversation about accessibility in Elden Ring. It has been brought up various times across various mediums by various people that Elden Ring is not, or FromSoft games in general, are not particularly accessible to disabled players. And people who are asking for accessibility are not actually asking for an easy mode. That isn't the intent. Here's the thing I want to spell out where accessibility is concerned. People who are disabled, I felt myself doing it, I'm going to do it, is another tangent. There are also multiple kinds of disabilities, especially where gaming is concerned. There are long-term disabilities, there are situational disabilities, there are temporary disabilities. It counts as a disability where a video game like Elden Ring is concerned if you have a kid. You have a 2-year-old, you're trying to play Elden Ring, you can't pause. That is a situational disability that you have, where the game not having the option for you to be able to pause, for example, is a hindrance for your particular disability, a situational disability. You may need to pause to stop your kid from putting a fork into a socket.
That went viral because a lot of people were like, huh, that's not a disability. That's not a disability. Like, how are you going to correlate having a kid to having a disability? Now, if you listen to the whole thing, she said situational disability, and I've never heard this term before. I don't work in the gaming industry, so I decided to Google it like anybody that doesn't know information should, and I pulled up a lot of definitions or interesting things about disabilities and situational disabilities, and I wanted to read them to you. Everyone faces situational disabilities. If you think you don't have disabilities, picture this. You're outside on a sunny day, which makes it hard to see your mobile phone. So you use one of your hands to shade the phone or turn up the contrast for a clearer view. According to conventional wisdom, you don't have a disability. Instead, most people just see the contrast button as smart technology. Or, put another way, it's the solution to a problem we all occasionally face. You couldn't see the screen, right? So, what's the lesson? While you may not have a permanent condition, you do have a disability at that moment. The contrast tools help those with vision-related disabilities to read and understand digital content, but it also helps everyone else do the same thing when necessary, especially in a situational environment like being outdoors on a bright sunny day. Let's look at more situational disability examples below. And so they go into different discussions on what examples could be. Some of the ones that they brought up is, hypothetically, if you're carrying a box and you're walking on flat ground, you have a certain cadence to how quickly you could move with that box. If you all of a sudden encounter a step up or just stairs in general, that is a situational disability to your ability to traverse the ground that you're walking on. If you're at a concert and you are trying to hear somebody else, you are going to face a situational disability of not being able to hear people 3 feet from you as well as you would if you were in normal settings like in a house. And so a situational disability isn't a physical disability. If it was, it would be described as a physical disability. Much like there is a difference between a BB gun and a paintball gun and a handgun and a shotgun. All of the monikers that come before gun specify what type of gun it is. And so nobody would ever confuse a shotgun from a paintball gun, for instance, just like you shouldn't confuse a situational disability versus a permanent debilitating disability. However, that's why Twitter exists. So all the people, all of the troglodytes with 2 brain cells can come together and they can misconstrue the argument incorrectly. And I don't want to dive too much into if you disagree with what situational disabilities are, if you want to just be wrong, you're more than entitled to. I don't want to talk too much about situational disabilities. It's just she used the term correctly and people got mad about it because it's Twitter. But regardless, the entire point of the argument is about whether or not Elden Ring should have a pause button, whether or not pausing the game should exist. Now, technically it does exist. There are ways to pause the game. It's not easy to do. Not everybody knows how to access, not everybody knows how to pause Elden Ring in order to play. And so the question is, should it be removed entirely or should you add a pause button? Now, for me personally, I don't think a pause button makes or breaks my game. My personal opinion is if I have to get up, if I have to get up from my computer because an emergency happens and my character dies, my character dies. It's a video game. It doesn't hurt me in the slightest. But at the same time, is a pause button going to allow me to beat Melania's water dance? Is a pause button going to allow Moog to stop just fucking one-shotting me? When I go into the DLC, is a pause button going to stop Renala from dropping her orb bullshit and just killing me on the spot because I don't know how to dodge at that point in time? Absolutely fucking not. It's silly. And so, does it hurt if a pause button exists in Elden Ring? Does this change the difficulty of the game? No, of course not. Does it make it easier for players to potentially pick up where they left off without having to restart in a weird spot over and over and over again? Yes, absolutely. Now, your opinion on this, on whether or not a pause button should exist, can be discussed. This is a good discussion to have about whether this type of accessibility is valuable. But that's not what happened on Twitter. What happened on Twitter is people wanted to nitpick a definition that this content creator used correctly and then tried to basically false equivocate it and claim that they were talking about something else. And it devolved into just the stupidest fucking thing imaginable, which is what Twitter is best at right now. You pay for Twitter Blue, you get paid for engagement, and so you can just do this low-hanging fruit nonsense and you can make $5 off of just the stupidest tweet imaginable because people are going to respond to it. I mean, look, I'm talking about it right now. And so my perspective on it is if you have a question about a definition of a word or a term, maybe look it up and you won't look so dumb. But regardless, the question about whether or not a pause button should exist, I don't think impacts the difficulty of the game. I don't think it sullies a Dark Souls experience. Sekiro has a pause button. So that's where I'm sitting. I don't see why this is a big deal. I don't see why this became an issue it did, but I wanted to talk about it regardless. But yeah, that's going to be the end of this video. I'm just going to end it here. If you guys have any questions or comments, please provide it in the section below. Feel free to say whatever you want about anything I brought up in the video, and I'll do my best to have a conversation with you guys. So I'm going to end this video here. Thank you for watching, guys. Have a nice day.